Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Planning Control Committee on Thursday, the 11th of October, 2018. Apologies, with an apology from Councillor Harwood, who's got deputy mayoral engagements this evening. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Nawaz.
And Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Councillor Khan, right, Shiraz Khan. Thank you. Item 2 is late items to be introduced by the Chair. I would like to include, when we get to item 7, which is the potential future site visits, to include a couple of extras. One is a development in Pastures Hill, and the other is the former fireplace workshop, both of which I think it'll be useful for the committee to have a look at before we make any decisions on them. So we can discuss the pros and cons of that at item 7, with your permission. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor West.
Only to reiterate, as I always do, that item 2 is in my ward, Chair.
Thank you. That's not necessary to do, but it's perfectly acceptable for you to do so. Minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of September. Can we take those as accepted? Thank you. Item 5 is appeal decisions. Mr. Woodhead.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 to talk about. The first one, top of the list, Kinnaird, 3 Pennylong Lane, was for a sizeable extension to this dwelling. It's the second property in on the eastern side when you approach in from Broadway, and we refused permission under delegated powers. They've got an existing large flat-roofed extension to the tune of about 6 to 7 metres in depth, and we refused permission for a first floor extension, thinking it was too big, overbearing for the neighbours. We refused permission. The inspector disagreed, mainly on the grounds of how the property is situated along Pennylong Lane. It sort of sits set back relative to number 1, which is on the first house in, sits rather further forward of the main line of properties on Pennylong Lane. So he felt that the extension was tolerable in that context. It also included a pitch roof. The host dwelling had got hipped roof, so we felt the pitch roof detail was also out of character, but he disagreed with that, and so he allowed it. So we'll take that one on the chin. I'm sure people along Pennylong Lane may comment on it when it starts to be constructed, because it's fairly sizeable. Second on the list, 114 Brighton Road. This sits on the junction of Brighton Road and Alistry Street, and it was a proposal to extend the building. It's on the corner, raise it by another storey and convert it to 6 flats. The existing hot food takeaway at ground level to be converted also. We felt it was too big on the junction. It stepped up from the prevailing 2-storey terrace. We thought it just had an unusual relationship in that context, and the inspector disagreed again and said no, there was some variety in the street scene in terms of building heights, roof designs, and other features, and he felt that he was tolerable in that situation. And it included also on the Alistry Street elevation quite a few windows at ground first and second floor level, and we felt there was a rather unusual arrangement, but again he felt that there was variety in the street and it could take it. So again, we'll take that one on the chin. Finally, land rear of 162 Portland Street. This was for a very, very small site fronting Pear Tree Crescent, and permission was sought for the erection of a single dwelling. We thought it was exceedingly tight, and the inspector agreed, and he dismissed the appeal on 3 grounds, on design grounds, and in terms of the adverse impact on the living conditions of existing occupiers at 162 Portland Street, and the very poor living environment for future occupiers of any dwelling. So only 1 from 3 there, Chair, but we'll take those on the chin. Thank you.
Anybody got any comments on the appeals? Councillor Kerr.
I just wondered whether it was the same inspector who dealt with the first 2.
It was, Mr. Harrison, and he dealt with the appeal at Shevin Road last time around as well. So he takes a fairly balanced view, but he's quite pro development, I think, from what I've seen of his decisions. But we'll take it on the chin.
We get no say in who does the appeals. Great. Take us on then to item 6, which is applications to be considered. The first one is 339 Duffield Road, Alistry, known as the Shell Garage. It's been called in by one of the ward members, who's going to introduce this to us. Stephen Bate, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application, as you say, at the Shell filling station on Duffield Road. You see the site on the plan on the screen. While we're on the screen, we can show you the layout there with the existing forecourt canopy and the existing shop aligned east-west at the north end of the site. The site is adjoining highway also on the north side called Church Walk. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see the relationship to the adjoining conservation area, which is to the northwest there. The application involves the proposed demolition of the existing sales building and its replacement with a new, larger single-storey structure. One thing I'd say to note on page 6 of the report, part 5.3, the Conservation Officer's comments should refer to policy CP20 and not C20, just a matter of clarification there. As I say, the site fronts Duffield Road, the A6, within a small neighbourhood centre. Otherwise, the site is generally surrounded by residential properties. To the north, the site abuts Church Walk, a very narrow highway, and the Alistry Conservation Area is located to the northwest of the site, but it does not immediately adjoin the site. The proposal is for the replacement of the existing sales building with a larger structure, around about double the floor space, with a flat roof, which will be approximately 0.6 of a metre higher than the existing building. It will be constructed of composite panels, primarily in white to reflect the colour of the render of the existing building, but we've agreed a brown colour panel on the north elevation where it would be visible from the conservation area. As I say, it follows the same east-west alignment, but it is set in from the highway boundary with Church Walk. At the west end of the site, the land levels rise and the structure and the ancillary compound will be set into the bank with some loss of landscaping. There'll be no changes to the remainder of the site, so that includes the canopy, the offset fills and the LPG tank. The existing car parking on the forecourt would remain. So the principle of the replacement shop within the neighbourhood centre is wholly acceptable. The general design, appearance and materials are also considered to be acceptable. The main issue here, however, is, which has been raised by local residents, relates to the historic relationship of the site to the adjoining highway Church Walk. In summary, the existing sales building encroaches onto the highway by approximately 0.2 metres, about 9 inches, and an agreement was reached back in 2004 between the council and Shell that this encroachment will be rectified by the way of a new building. However, the permission granted in 2004 for the new building was never implemented. Therefore, the current proposal is an opportunity to remedy this historic problem. The submitted plans show the illegal wall removed and the proposed building set back from the highway. It is acknowledged that the proposal needs to resolve some other issues, particularly relating to replacement street lighting, CCTV camera and levels differences between the site and Church Walk, and concerns have also been raised regarding visibility for vehicles exiting Church Walk. The Highways comments are included in the report, and these acknowledge that further details are needed to agree the treatment of the highway edge, and a suitable condition is suggested. Regarding egress visibility from Church Walk, the latest drawings show the proposed staff parking set further from the site boundary, which is now a metre back from the pavement edge, such that visibility would be improved. No highway objections are raised, subject to the imposition of conditions. Regarding other matters, there have been no objections on heritage grounds. Potential concerns regarding any impact on residential amenity can be addressed by a construction management plan, which is also a recommended condition. The recommendation is to grant permission subject to conditions. I would also add another condition which isn't in the report to confirm the materials to be used. The applicant has already submitted colour samples of the insulated panels and officers believe these are acceptable. So subject to that additional condition, the recommendation is for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Steer, welcome back. I think you're so regular at these meetings, we ought to make you a member. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have no objection to the increased size of the proposed retail unit. My concerns relate to the boundary between Church Walk and the Shell site, even though the committee report makes reference to possible conditions with regard to the boundary. I remember Church Walk 50 or so years ago as a leafy footway. Today it is a highway serving 8 dwellings with the usual number of private vehicles involved. There have been 3 amendments of the plans originally submitted, incorporating various public comments. The latest amendment still does not fully cover the problems posed by this boundary. The north elevation of the sales unit now has a brick plinth of sufficient height to allow the ground within the Shell site to follow the rise of Church Walk as it progresses westward. This change in ground level is my assumption. It is not confirmed by any of the details on the submitted plans. When the existing boundary wall is demolished and the line of the boundary between Church Walk and Shell site has been established, the edge of the highway will be on this boundary line. The committee report states in section 5.1 that the boundary line will be defined by bollards, but bollards are classified in highways language as signs, and according to the traffic signs manual, bollards have to be set back 450 millimetres from the edge of the highway. The Shell plan shows the bollards inset from the boundary line without being specific on the dimension. The bollards will do nothing to prevent pedestrians entering Shell land. It must be Shell's responsibility to ensure that any person entering their site is safe and will not, for example, fall down onto the floor of the compound at the west end of the development where a drop of about 1 metre occurs. Nothing is shown on the drawings to prevent this happening. At its greatest height, the difference between the floor of this compound and Church Walk is about 1.5 metres. That figure is taken from the levels given on the site drawings. Unless some protection such as sheet piling is used, there will be a danger of Church Walk collapsing into this excavation before the retaining construction described on the plans is completed. The boundary between Church Walk and the Shell site has not received full and proper considerations with regard to safety and visual appearance. As proposed, the appearance of the boundary will successively, working westward, be the retail unit with its brick plinth surmounted by brown prefabricated panels, then a timber fence, then an original stone wall, and finally an existing overgrown timber fence.
I have to stop you there. Thank you, Mr. Steer. You've gone over the 3 minutes. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Again, no objection to the building and the use of the building, but there are some points that members need to know. With regard to the doubling of the size of the retail space, it is incumbent on highways to ensure that the visibility splay for access and egress meets the national guidelines, and I'm afraid this doesn't. This has been detailed by residents who have put in objections to the application and have detailed the Highways Acts that are appropriate to this application. Mr. Steer has mentioned the boundary wall, the ancient boundary wall at the end of the Church Walk. That was kicked out by approximately 9 inches to line up with the shell garage wall. That will need replacing on its original foundations. Otherwise, as Mr. Steer said, there is a danger of the wall and the building collapsing into the shell garage. As you exit Church Walk, there is an issue whereby if you drive out straight, and I've provided the photographic evidence to our planning department, all you see is a white wall. And I appreciate that the modified plans do set aside on the left-hand side an area where vehicles can move out to be a metre away from that wall, so that at least pedestrians do have a chance of not being knocked over by vehicles leaving the Church Walk area. The other issues are lighting columns that will need to be put into Church Walk to replace the existing ones. If these are put in by the boundary of the shell building, then that will negate the moving of the building by 9 inches, because those columns will cover that. And the other issue is the licensing of the shell site, where CCTV was insisted upon, and I see no replacement for this on the submitted plan.
Thank you. Lighting and licensing, of course, are outside the remit of this committee, but no doubt you having said that will help people consider them. Mr. Bate, would you like to come back on the points about bollards and the setback of a metre and various things collapsing?
Thank you, Chairman. I think both planning and highways officers appreciate that there's still some work to be done with this application, particularly that's what's resulted in us recommending condition 4, which requires details of the highway boundary reinstatement to be submitted so that we can see exactly how it's going to be dealt with. So I think we're aware of that, and we consider that can be successfully addressed through that condition. Similarly, the highway boundary edge, because it's still to be fully agreed, that may result in there being no bollards. It may result in there being another structure, another fence along the boundary there, because there is a difference in levels there, and that will need to be resolved. The latest amended plans does show a replacement of the CCTV camera on the building, so that matter has been addressed. Lighting, as you say, again, is something that is outside the planning system, but it has been flagged up. The developer has said and agreed that they will replace the lighting that's currently attached to the wall. So I think from a planning perspective, and my highway colleague will no doubt have his say, from a planning perspective, we think that this scheme actually is an improvement on the current situation. It addresses the historic problem of the wall encroaching onto the highway. The parking spaces that are currently by the entrance to Church Walk are actually set back a metre now from the edge of pavement, so that would increase the visibility there for cars coming out. So we feel that the scheme is acceptable, and that's subject to the additional information that can be submitted by way of the conditions. Then that should address all those other concerns that have been raised. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments from a highway point of view?
Mr. Bate has actually covered all the points I would have raised, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hassel.
Thanks, Chair. Just regards the composite panels that are on the rear of this structure, I'm mindful this is adjoining a conservation area. Is there something more that can be done that, or a condition that can be applied that states that a material that is more in keeping with the conservation area is used rather than just which is basically a brown panel? That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I don't know if Mr. Bate can answer that.
I think if members wish that, we can go back to the applicants and see that that certainly is what they've provided at the moment. Originally, it was to be the whole building was going to be constructed with white panels. I think they've made a concession and said, okay, this elevation of the building, which part of it will be facing the conservation area, is now brown. I think we feel that it's probably just about acceptable. But clearly, if members feel otherwise, then we can go back to the applicants and ask them the question.
I was also interested in that long, dark brown wall. And I was looking at not so much from the conservation area, which is only the back end of it. I was thinking that actually that's quite a dark walking area, and we've already talked about the lighting there. And a dark brown wall against a dark enclosed thing may actually add to the darkness and of the area. And I was thinking that from a pedestrian's perspective, at dusk, we might prefer it to be slightly lighter than dark brown. So I don't know what the opportunity is in terms of colour palette for those things, but I just thought I'd raise it. Got some other points though, Chair. And I think the first of them I'll come up because this is a unique situation, and we've got a number of issues we've heard that are still waiting to be resolved. And I thought that it would be a good example of where local members could be kept very closely informed and be given a say about what is proposed and delegate to them, maybe with yourself, Chair, those final agreements on those points, because I think it deserves it. The second thing, this is a petrol station which, as far as I know, has always been there. It's long-standing. And when it was first arrived, it was a common thing for curbed crossings to be put in at all small junctions like this. But these days, we are trying to encourage people to walk and not drive everywhere. And the visual change to go from being a curbed crossing to being a dropped crossing, if we're able to make those changes at this point while there is other work doing, then I think that would be advantageous to our expectations of encouraging walking. Particularly as Church Walk is obviously a convenient cut through in that very close locality. There were also concerns being raised about pedestrian safety, and giving pedestrians priority across the footway, I think will raise awareness in drivers' minds to think pedestrian more. So it might improve pedestrian safety in that area as well. We're about to be told that the footway is outside the site boundary, but we do 278 agreements, so presumably we could do something like that for this one if we so wished. And finally, there's a little tiny bit of cycle parking which is actually quite difficult to find, and it's been squeezed into a very small area. And it shows 2 cycles in that location. I think it'd be almost impossible to actually lock 2 cycles in that location, because you have to stand on the wall, which you can't do, to be able to get to one of them. So can we ask for the cycle parking to be provided in a better location, where it is actually accessible and stipulate a Sheffield Stands type parking?
Thank you. I think none of us would have any disagreement with any of the points you've raised, particularly keeping the ward members involved. And as there's going to be negotiation, I imagine the office could take on board the things Councillor Kerr has said. Is there any problem with that? Particularly the curb crossing and the cycle parking. Good. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as a local Alistair resident for over 30 years and also a ward councillor, I can confirm it is a very long-standing development. In fact, the armed robbery I investigated in 1984 still remains unsolved. Now then, one of the main concerns I've got, and I hope it's addressed on this, the current building at the side holds a cash point, and what you get is people who don't want petrol, they want to use the cash point, so they drive. You see where that little it says filling station, and then up above it there's that little butt out bit, and that's where the cash point is.
So you get several cars parking there, and they actually block the junction of Church Walk and park on the pavement. I would love to see that cash point go and be included into the new building, so you don't get the problems with road safety on that corner there. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if the officers know where the cash point's going to be, but I would think there would be one. But we certainly don't want... Yeah. There could be, you know, if it's there and it's going to be used by people, they'll park right next to it. They won't use the feet at all. That's my concern anyway.
It's very handy for pedestrians, and there is a huge amount of space at the southern end of the site to park, but I agree people don't want to walk that far. I would have thought... Well, perhaps that could also be discussed with the applicant while you're dealing with that sort of thing. I would have thought moving a cash point is quite a big ticket item.
Chairman, the current scheme shows the cash point now on the south elevation. I accept it's near that corner. Is the suggestion that it should be to the west end of the building?
Yeah, it needs to be away from the A6. Okay. As far away from the A6 as possible.
I understand that yellow lines won't be enforceable, but if the applicant can do something to discourage people from parking there, it might be worth trying. Councillor Kerr.
I'm just mindful that luckily not too many in Derby, but there have been some crash and steal into ATMs in other places, and moving it to the rear of the site would actually protect it from that sort of aggression as well.
Okay, it's a minor thing, and I think the officers can negotiate that with the applicants. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back again to the construction of the building, really. I too do not like the long wall of brown panels. The wall could do with being broken up, really, so the building, I don't know, somehow staged or some sort of area where it changes. This might be a bit unreasonable, but can't it be something like a brick construction with a slate roof, so that in the middle of Alistry, then that would look lovely, and it could have a proper apex on it and really blend in with the area.
It's very tempting to design something from a planning application. Our job is to approve or disapprove this. It isn't in a conservation area, although it's near to one. Garages, generally, filling stations aren't the most beautiful things, and they have at least tried to have a neutral colour along there. But as you say, the officers are going to negotiate this, and perhaps they can try. I don't think you can change the materials to brick and slate at this point. It's asking too much. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question about on the western side of the site. It looks at the moment as if it's covered in trees and looks to be sort of separate from the separated from the actual development. Is there going to be any loss of trees or natural habitat on that western side of the site, do we know?
I think the answer is no, but that's not actually in the application site, is it?
That's right, Chairman. The application, because it's extending the building westwards, there will be a loss of some trees on the bank, but there is a large area of land to the west of the site which is outside the scope of this application, which I think has got more vegetation on it. And we are suggesting a landscaping condition as part of the recommendation.
Okay. Any other speakers? In which case the recommendation is to grant conditionally with an additional condition, number 10, about materials. So that would actually cover your brown wall. Yes, as the curb, or would that be better as a something that can be negotiated
Chair, I think just to come in on that point, obviously we can't sort of put conditions or requirements relating to pedestrian issues that don't arise out, from the development itself. So any requirement in terms of pedestrian issues and improvements have to arise from the development. So. Well, I'm just making the point. It's not to deal with. We can't impose conditions or sort of deal with matters that sort of are inherently there already. But if they do arise from the development because of increased footage, possibly. But again, I don't know if there's evidence of how much pedestrian increase there would be from that development.
I mean, the floor space is doubled, isn't it? It's about 230 square metres from about 100 and something. We could put the question to the applicant. It would be something under the Highways Act, as you say, 278 agreement, which is a voluntary agreement, and it would be something to negotiate. But we couldn't insist on it, in my view.
Please show. Thank you. Have you got them all? Yeah. That's.
Thank you, Chair. As you picked up, there are a couple of typos in the report in relation to the Cock and Bull. It is the site of the former Cock and Bull Public House on Sinfin Lane. With full permission sought for the development to create an industrial unit for the purpose of breaking cars and selling car parts from the site. The site has been vacant for a long period of time and more recently has had 2 shipping containers placed upon it. It lies alongside the Sinfin Business Park, and there are a couple of residential properties directly to the south of the site, behind 2 existing retail units. There are 2 groups of mature trees to the north of the site, which are actually off the site, which are both covered by a TPO, a tree preservation order. There's a few updates for members, and you will have had information circulated since the report was printed. We've had a tree protection plan and updated arboricultural impact assessment, which have been submitted to reflect the amendments to the footprint of the unit, which has been made during the course of this application. Following that, we've received further comments from the tree officer, who has raised no objections to the use of pile and beam foundations within the root protection areas of the trees, and recommends conditions to secure method statements for removal of tarmac and to agree details of tree protection and arboricultural monitoring during development. We've also had further comments from the Highways officer, raising no objections to the submitted tracking layout. He welcomes the provision of cycle parking and recommends that setting the gates back within the site is required in terms of alterations to fencing and gates. So therefore raises no objections to the overall works, subject to various conditions which are on his comments. We've also had further verbal comments from our environmental health officer in relation to the change in the footprint of the building, and he has requested an update to the noise assessment which was submitted, and this would be secured by the control of the condition which is already in your report in relation to acoustic testing. All the conditions set out in section 8 of the report will be amended to reflect these updated consultee comments. The principle of industrial development with an element of trade sales is considered to be acceptable in this location. It's effectively an extension to the surrounding business park on Sinfin Lane. The retail element also accords with saved policy S10, which allows such types of sales uses in a predominantly commercial or industrial setting. The presence of residential properties to the south and on the opposite side of Sinfin Lane means there are potential amenity impacts to be considered due to the car braking operation proposed on site. 2 objections and a petition have been received, which mainly raise concerns about noise, pollution and traffic. A noise assessment was provided for the proposed use, which is all for the car braking operations to be carried out inside the industrial unit. The Environmental Health Officer was satisfied with that subject to recommended conditions being attached and complied with, that the development will not have adverse impacts on nearby residents, and these conditions are included in 12, 13 and 14 in your report. Any site contamination will be dealt with by means of conditions, also as recommended by the Environmental Health Officer. The form and layout of the proposed industrial unit during the application has been amended to minimise the adverse impact on the root protection areas of the TPO trees which lie to the north. These trees are mainly Lombardy poplars and are shown on the north side on that plan. The building would be set in approximately 9 metres from the boundary, which avoids the roots of all but 2 of the trees, and the additional tree information submitted demonstrates that with pile and beam foundations being used for the building and appropriate tree protection measures, the adjacent trees would be satisfactorily protected, and the tree officer is now satisfied with the remaining details can be secured by condition. In terms of traffic impacts, the highways officer is satisfied there would not be an adverse effect on the local road network. There is adequate parking and loading space to be provided within the site, and this should avoid any obstruction of the highway. Cycle parking is also proposed within the site. So, subject to conditions, the development is not considered to result in any loss of highway safety. Overall, the scheme is considered to be an acceptable form of industrial development in this location, subject to conditions to control impacts on trees, highway safety and residential amenity. It's considered to be in line with the relevant policies in the Part 1 plan and safe policies in the local plan, and therefore is recommended for approval. You have no speakers.
Thank you. Members of the committee? Nobody wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Kerr.
I was going to just talk about that cycle parking, which appears to be within the building and looks rather like cycle lockers rather than cycle parking, which is fine if you have a Brompton that folds up, but not very useful otherwise. But I also think there ought to be some cycle parking outside, and they've got lots of space for visitors, because you don't normally sort of knock on the door when they go in and just lock up your bicycle before talking to somebody. So visitor cycle parking somewhere. And here we also have, Chair, another example of a footway, a long-standing footway, which is not particularly pedestrian friendly. It's another opportunity where we could be saying, can we have a continuous footway through there? We're not expecting large numbers of vehicles in and out, and it just makes it easier for people who are walking.
Do you want to come back on any of those points?
We can amend, there is a cycle parking condition, so we can amend that to include outside cycle parking if you wish. And say the dropped crossing, we can include that as a note on the informative note on the decision notice.
If that's a proposal of a change to a condition, does everybody accept that? Anybody against it? In which case, the recommendation is to grant conditionally. Those in favour? All in favour? Anybody against? Again, a unanimous one. We're doing very well this evening. Which brings us on to item 7, which is potential future site visits. You have a list, page 3 of item 7. I added the Pastures Hill one that has been brought to me by an elected member who feels before we make a decision it would be useful to go there. Does anybody want to tell us anything about it, or is it?
Yeah, I think possibly people have seen it. It's out the ground, and it's prompted a very strong objection from a neighbour, and so we feel that it would be prudent to go and look at it. It'll definitely be on the agenda for the November meeting. So it's a case of just familiarising ourselves with it. So there are differences in levels, just looking at the relationship with the neighbours and how it sits within the street scene. So I think a site visit would be more than useful there, so we can set that up.
Pastures Hill.
163 Pastures Hill.
Where there's difference in levels, it's always quite useful to go and have a look. It's very difficult to see that on a flat two-dimensional plan. Okay, the other was the fireplace workshop. The developer has asked me to go, and I feel that would be lobbying. I would rather it was an official site visit so that we can all go and see it properly. Are you happy that that's arranged at an appropriate time? The next one is... Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
I'm just aware, if we're going to be visiting Pastures Hill, there was a very well-attended pre-consultation meeting for a supermarket as part of the H9 area, just beyond, further out of town from there. People are coming down all over the place on whether they actually think it ought to go ahead and where it ought to be, and the issue there, which is just beyond the existing Heatherton District Neighbourhood Centre, is where the access should be. There are 3 large oak trees with TPOs on them. There's an access. And I just think if we're going to be in that area, it would be useful to do that at the same time. They said they might be putting an application in as soon as November.
I think that might be quite useful. It'll help us make a decision, won't it? So we could do the two at the same time. Shouldn't take too long. Thank you. Fireplace workshop, you're happy to do that. The next one is land west of Kingsway. It's laying out of a car park. I'm sure you don't want to go there. Okay. Next one's a variation of condition, the finished floor level of the building. Anybody keen to go? No? Right. Another variation of condition about sandwiches and goodness knows what. I don't think we need to make a committee decision on that. Kingsway Hospital, it's the reserve matters. Well, if you don't know where Kingsway Hospital is, we're in a problem, but the laying out of the car park, the laying out of the houses and so on, I think we can see better on a plan than actually going and looking at... it is, isn't it? So let's not do that. So it's Pastures Hill and the proposed Aldi site on one occasion, and the fireplace workshop. Over the page, 18 Agard Street. I think we all know about Agard Street, do we not? It's a full application, 32 apartments. Do you want to go and look at what they're going to lose? Okay. The former Normanton Junior School at Grange Avenue. It's just surface water drainage. No point going to that. Audrey House in Vernon Street, change of use from mental health unit to 13 residential units. It's in a conservation area, but you can see it from the road. No point in a special visit. Okay, good. Let's see, when do people particularly want meetings? Do they want them first thing in the morning? Do they want them at lunchtime? Do they want them in the evening? It's getting to the point of year where it's dark in the evening, so what time suits people best? Is it?
Yeah, meetings for me are better in the morning.
9:30 sort of time, or 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock better? Yeah, people have got different circumstances, but yeah. Not before 9:30 because of all the school traffic and goodness knows what. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, not this meeting. No. That would be fun. Well, you're right. You're right. Okay, that concludes the meeting. Thanks very much. I think that's a record, isn't it? 7:15.